morning, everybody. Nikki Burnett here, Taste Life Nutrition Radio, streaming live on KUHSdenver.com, where we are, the goal is to bring you as much goodness and truth as far as the science is concerned with health and wellness, which, of course, as we know, is it's physical, it's mental, it's emotional, it's spiritual, it's financial. And the goal, we really want to do our best to help you and me, right, live the best life we possibly can. I think it's important to live well, because when we live well, then we can share well and we can serve well. And that's what I love. That's what I love about what I do. It's what I love about this show, because I have the ability to bring to you what I believe is great information. Most of the time I have a guest, and my guests are amazing, but sometimes it's just me. And I like it when it's just me, because then I can talk about some things that, like I said last week, that are just, sitting on my heart, that I think are important to get out there, that we can discuss and hopefully give a little bit of guidance. And I'm also here. I can see you both on, my Instagram as well as my Facebook. So would love to, if you have questions, feel free to ask questions, make comments. Let me know if you have any thoughts or any concerns or anything that we can talk about that can be beneficial for you. I am here in this role and in this life as a servant, and I want to do my very best to give my best, and then give you all the good information that I can possibly give you. So here we go. But as always, we start the show with gratitude, and I think I'm going to say kind of the same thing I said last week, but maybe a little bit different. So as many of you already know, I have launched a program called Soulful Conception. I've been talking a lot about preconception care over, the last year or so, because it is one of the most impactful things that we can do as far as I'm concerned. Preconception care can impact the individual, but it can also impact the baby, and it can also impact generations. And we are in a situation where we have a lot of really sick people, sick in a lot of different ways, whether it's physical, mental, emotional. Why is that? It's, there's a lot of fear going around right now. There's a lot of confusion. And if we take it back to basics, there's a lot of confusion just even what's around health. What is health? And what is not healthy? Food, one of the most basic things that we can, that we deal with, ingest, live with on a daily basis, multiple times a day. There's a lot of confusion about what is actually good, healthy food, right? We have, we're confused about even water. What water is healthy, and the fact that most of our water isn't healthy is a problem. We've got water that comes to us through our homes that is still full of toxic chemicals and parasites, and it's really, it's on us as individuals to understand what it is that we're ingesting, and then do what we can do to mitigate the toxic load that we experience on a daily basis, which is just part of life. So filtering our water with a good filter is very important. So I kind of got off track. Gratitude. What I'm grateful for is the fact that we have launched Soulful Conception, and we have a group who's going through the program as we speak. And it is a program where, of course, I am doing the leading and the facilitating and some of the educating, but I'm also bringing in practitioners, many whom you've seen here at the show, who have this amazing gift to give when it comes to allowing women to to, well, women and men, right, to do their best at being healthy in a very holistic manner. And when I say holistic, I'm talking about physical health, but as I, like I said at the beginning of the show, what I'm always talking about is it's spiritual health, it's relational health, it is mental and emotional and financial, right? There can be a lot of stressors with all of these things, and we want to decrease the stress as much as we possibly can, because what we want is to we want, stress just creates inflammation. We want to decrease stress, decrease inflammation. We want to address any kind of conditions that we might be dealing with in order to have the healthiest pregnancy and baby as possible, and truly it affects generations to come. So I'm grateful for those who have joined me on this this sort of new journey of mine, but it's not just mine, right? This is something that is, my hope is that it is impactful for many, many people and many generations. It's a big statement, but, here it is. That is my goal. It's my hope. I believe it is what has been given to me as my role in life. And so, I hope it's my word of the year is impact. And so my hope is that I and then all those who are on my team can impact as many people as possible, because that only means we're impacting generations. And it's pretty cool stuff. So I'm excited about that. So grateful for those who are with me. Know that if soulful conception is something that you're interested in, or if you have family members or friends who are interested in it, that this is something that is open to join at any point, whenever the time is right for you. There's no, we had a launch phase, right? But it is just because it was ready. So it's ready for anybody who's ready to jump in at any point. I also want you to know that we want to make sure that men are included in this program to the degree that they want to be, which I hope is 100%, right? Or at least 50-50. And so when it comes to a program like this, I am encouraging the spouses, the partners, to join in on this journey. So I want them to be a part of this. We will talk a lot. We'll talk some about male health and fertility, because it's very, very important. I do realize that this mostly speaks to women, and it is mostly for women, but I want this to be a partnership, and I want men to be involved, and I want men to join in on the group sessions and to play their role, because they play a huge role in the health of the baby and, of course, in the health of future generations. So always feel free to reach out, ask me questions. This is, again, it's just something that comes from my heart. I'm super excited about it. But today, what I really want to talk about is I want to talk about conditions that have an impact on conception. And when I say that, yes, there are specific conditions that affect conception. But these conditions also affect life. They can affect people who aren't trying to get pregnant. So, I am sort of gearing this hour around fertility and conception, but it really is for everyone. Now, understandably, men don't get, polycystic ovarian syndrome, but there are, other autoimmune conditions and things that can happen that can affect male sperm counts and fertility and motility and all of these different things. So we'll talk about some of those, although today, though, will be mostly geared around women's health, women's conditions, and women's in the conditions that affect conception. And we'll also talk about labs. I'm a nerd, and I love to talk about labs. But labs are important. Labs are really important in helping us understand the body, how the body's functioning, why it's functioning as it is. And labs go deeper than what you would typically have run. It's deeper than a comprehensive metabolic panel and CBC that you typically will run. The ones that I run are much more comprehensive. And it also goes deeper than just having blood hormones checked, serum hormones checked. So There are a number of conditions that most of us know about, right? We know that, a lot of women deal with things like PCOS, endometriosis, fibroids, all of these things, infections. Let's see, what else do we have? Autoimmune conditions, right? So these are kind of the sort of the main ones, and we're not going to dig super deep into these, but I do have, hey Missy, I do have people who ask me on a regular basis, does PCOS or polycystic ovarian syndrome, does that affect fertility? Yeah, sure. But it also it can affect your lifestyle. It can affect your periods. It can affect, everything about you because it can be painful. And so PCOS is one of the most common disorders as far as, hormonal disorders for women. And it's interesting to me, too, because when I look, I try to do, I do some, research prior to coming on the show. And a lot of these conditions in my research shows when I get the information from sort of your mainstream sources, right? A lot of them will say, we don't know why this happens, which I think is a joke, because we do know why these things happen. These things happen due to environmental factors and due to stress, due to food, due to nutrient deficiencies, due to heavy metals, due to mycotoxin exposure, due to EMFs in our environment. So we may not be able to pinpoint, but there are all of these factors, and different factors affect different people in different ways, right? That's why we're all unique, and why we all need to understand when it comes to dealing with our own conditions and situations. We've got to learn. We've got to understand our body, which again goes back to why lab testing is so crucial to understanding your body. The best way for me to explain, to talk about lab testing, is this is a way that your body's talking to us. So you hear me say all the time, right, that our body is constantly trying to tell us what's going on. So if it's not talking to us, we're not feeling anything, right, which is sometimes what we want. But if we have a pain, if we have a heartburn, if we have whatever the bloating or the brain fog, or whatever the case may be, you name it, or maybe it's a whole cluster of symptoms, which is what we call disease, right, or dis-ease. So we have all of these things, situations, symptoms, that's the body telling us, you got something up, and I can't do this by myself anymore. The body works really well on its own for a while, but it will start to break down. And so that's so often what we end up doing is, if we have this pain or we have this situation or this symptom, is we take a pill, or we cover it up, right? We can cover it up with alcohol. We can cover it up with ibuprofen. We can cover it up with PPIs, right? We can cover it up with all kinds of things. But what's happening is, that's all we're doing, is we're covering it up. And so if we're looking at, I totally get off track, but that's okay, because it's all super important. And it's the baseline to understanding any condition is your situation is unique, even though you may have the label, which I hate labels. I mean, but that's kind of what if we have a diagnosis, right? We tend to take it as a label. But a diagnosis of something like polycystic ovarian syndrome, we have to take a step back, and all these things we're going to talk about, but we have to take a step back and say, why did this happen? And it's not the answer that we get so often is, well, I don't know, it just happens. And that's what we get a lot from allopathic medicine is, well, we don't know why these things happen, it just happens. Or, holy smokes, it's a surprise. It's not a surprise, right? There are things that we have control over that allow or don't allow for things to happen. So PCOS has a lot to do with hormonal dysfunction. It has a lot to do with blood sugar levels. And so if we're eating, if we have a lot of stress will raise blood glucose levels. Obviously, high sugar diet will raise blood glucose levels, and a high sugar diet is not just sugar, right? Although it plays a huge role. but it's also the pasta and the bread and the food that creates more inflammation, which creates more stress, which is going to create more blood sugar or blood glucose elevation. And so we want I mean, PCOS can go along with like prediabetes or even diabetes. They can go hand in hand. And so it's a situation where, because we have the stress and we have the high glucose levels, that it also then increases our androgen levels, which is our testosterone and androstenedione and these more male hormones, but that women have as well, right? It's important for us to have good, healthy testosterone levels, right? It's what pushes our sex drive. We have to have a good sex drive. It's what pushes our muscle tone and things like that. But once for women it becomes too high, we start to see like hair on our chin, hair on our breasts. We'll see hair on our neck. We'll see pimples. We might experience hair loss, right? Hair loss on your head. That's not fun when you're losing hair on your head and gaining hair on your chest and your chin. It's not a good day, but it happens. And so what can we do about this? Well, we can modify our diet. We can modify our stress levels. We can look at what we're putting in our mouth. We can look at what we're putting on our skin. All of these factors are really, really important in allowing hormones to balance. Sometimes we've got to have supplementation. And honestly, I would say anybody I'm working with, if they've got PCOS or dealing with any of these conditions, there's going to be supplementation. We have to have supplementation because it is, especially if we want quicker results, right? Supplementation allows for quicker balance, quicker results, and sometimes food just can't do it for us, which is unfortunate. And maybe it can, it's going to take longer. So we can certainly change lifestyle. We can change food habits. We can change what we're putting on and in our body. But we also, if we want to be supportive of the endocrine system is what produces hormones, right? Hormones are little communicators, right? They talk back and forth to each other and to our body and tell the body what to do. And so we want to support the endocrine system. And by doing that, we are decreasing inflammation and we are balancing hormones. And sometimes it's just easiest to do it with supplementation. So PCOS is manageable, and it also can impact conception. And so we want to, if you're dealing with something like that, take a step back and look at your diet, look at your lifestyle, understand, I would say too, that doing a good hormone test, so if we were to talk about labs right now, I think that's there are a couple of really good ones when we're looking at PCOS. We can look at serum hormone levels, and usually we're looking at, what are we looking at? We're looking at estrogen. Usually it's just one estrogen. We're looking potentially at progesterone. We might be looking at FSH, which is follicle stimulating hormone, and luteinizing hormone, or LH. Those are some of the things we'll look at when we're looking at blood serum levels, which are important, right? Especially if we're looking at fertility and conception and holding on to a pregnancy and that kind of thing. We want to know those. We want to know the serum levels. The test that I tend to run alongside with that is when I'm looking at preconception planning is going to be one that's called cycle mapping, and then one that looks at all of the other hormones, and it's a urine hormone test, and so they call it a dried urine hormone test. And so cycle mapping actually is very specific to women, where you pee on a little piece of paper throughout the month and you can see where your cycle literally is throughout the entire month. And so if you're ovulating early, if you're ovulating late, if you're not ovulating at all, if you have a very long cycle, it can really help us to understand and to pinpoint when, if we need to balance hormones, when to have sex, all of these things. Now there are some really cool tests that can be super targeted on when you should be having sex. And so this is not that. This gives us just a good, really pretty view of what your cycle looks like throughout the month. And so you know, we have a lot of women who deal with really serious PMS symptoms, and so this can help with that as well. Help us to understand why and what's going on, where the imbalances are, so we can allow for balance in, you know, balancing the hormones. So then beyond that, the dried urine hormone test is a sample in one day. So it's usually days 19 to 22 that you will get this really big picture of other hormones. So the other hormones include your androgens. So like I said a little while ago, it's your DHEA, DHEAS, your testosterone, your androstenedione. There are a few, 2 or 3 other ones. But then it also looks at your 3 estrogens, 2 progesterones. Also then goes down, so I'm going down because it shows you in pathways, like your biochemical pathways is the way it's laid out on the lab report. So it's pretty cool stuff, the way it's laid out, because pathways are moved forward by enzymes. And if enzymes aren't working properly, if you have certain epigenetic variants that don't allow for enzymes to work properly, or nutrient deficiencies that don't allow enzymes to work properly, then things don't move down the biochemical pathways as they're supposed to. So we can look at where there might be hiccups in these biochemical pathways. And so we can look at things like methylation. So methylation is it's a process by which genes are expressed, and it happens in every cell in the body. It also happens in detoxification. So hormones have to be detoxified in a specific manner via the liver, right? And so we can look and see if you're not methylating well, or if you're over methylating. We can look and see if your estrogens are not being eliminated properly due to, you know, whatever, you know, detoxification factors may be inhibited. So it's really great in looking specifically at hormones. Now, methylation affects all kinds of things. Detoxification, we have to have detoxification for things more than just hormones, but this test is specific to methylation of hormones and detoxification of hormones and so forth. So it also, though, then will look at specific nutrients that play a role in detoxification of hormones, as well as neurotransmitters. And neurotransmitters are our little messengers that help us to focus or help us to be happy, right? And a lot of that's created in the gut, which is, then we'll get to this in a little bit, but it's super important to have a good, healthy gut, because then if you'll you know, the hope is you have good, healthy neurotransmitter function, which helps us to do the things that we need to do in life, right? We need to focus, we need to be happy, we need to have good, healthy emotions, and we need to be motivated, right? So that's what neurotransmitters do. So anyway, that we can look at these neurotransmitters. We can also look at oxidative stress. Oxidative stress is super important. We can see in this test if there is a pathway that estrogen is going down, and I'm kind of backing up a little bit, but a pathway that estrogen is going down where it can potentially be damaging to DNA, which is, you know, can cause cancer, right? We can also look at, you know, if we have oxidative stress. Oxidative stress is what has the potential of also causing cancer. It creates mitochondrial dysfunction. Mitochondria is, you know, basically how we operate. We have mitochondria, hundreds of thousands of mitochondria probably in every cell, every tissue in our body. There are little energy creators, and so we have to have good, healthy mitochondrial function for everything to function properly. So we can also then look at the adrenal glands. And so we talk about stress. We talk about how stress can impact fertility. We talk about how stress can impact life, and how stress in and of itself is the most common factor in disease creation. Take that to heart, right? I mean, we may be as healthy as we can possibly be, we're eating well, but if we have massive amounts of stress, we still break down, we still get sick, our brain still shrinks, right? So looking at our adrenal glands, how they're functioning, looking at cortisol and cortisone, and how they're playing a role, and if you have your There's a specific curve that we're looking for with your cortisol levels, and if it is in line, if it's the way that it's supposed to be, then things are functioning well. But if you've got super spiky cortisol, then that's a big problem. And then if it's all tanked, right? If you just have a straight line down at the bottom, then your adrenals aren't functioning well at all. We see fatigue and depression, and you can't get up off the couch, and it's hard to move in life. And this happens. It happens a lot. And so this dryad hormone urine test is a really cool, big test. It gives us tons of information, and we have the capability of running, I don't know, hundreds maybe of these really cool functional lab tests. But there are these certain few that I like to run on a regular basis because they are big and they give us a lot of information, and then they can point us into other directions, right? So we can see, okay, this is what's happening. Maybe we need to now go look at mycotoxin exposure. Now maybe we need to go look at heavy metal exposures or infection, right? Whatever the case may be. So that's the great thing about these tests, and we'll get into some more of those here in just a little bit. But let's move on to endometriosis. The interesting thing with endometriosis is it's another one that they say we don't know how this happens, but it seems to be associated with autoimmune disease. Well, one of the first things that I learned in nutrition school was endometriosis is an autoimmune disease. So it seems that there are some that don't really fully, it probably doesn't follow along the same lines as what a typical autoimmune disease is, because endometriosis is excessive tissue growth, right? It lines the uterus, but then it goes outside of the uterus. We have found uterine tissue, not me, but the scientists, the doctors, but have found it in brain tissue, in sitting on lungs and liver and on the colon. It is so interesting the way that this endometriosis, this tissue, has the ability to migrate. So interesting. So how does this happen? Not really sure, but in my understanding and in my training, it is considered an autoimmune condition. It also is associated a lot with lupus, with Hashimoto's, with there are one or two other ones. I wonder if I wrote it down here. Anyway, doesn't really matter, but there are however many hundreds of autoimmune conditions out there. But the point to this is, with one autoimmune condition, or when we have one autoimmune condition, it increases our chances exponentially of having multiple autoimmune conditions. Hormones can play a huge role in autoimmune conditions and the increase in them. So what we see a lot is as we move into menopause, our hormones are changing. If we have an autoimmune condition going into menopause, it tends to increase the chances during that time that more of them pop up. Super interesting stuff. So endometriosis is one that certainly can create a lot of pain. My mom had it. She had surgery to have it all removed. So, I know that for me, epigenetically, I have the potential for autoimmune disease. I have the potential for celiac disease. It's all over my family. But the cool thing is, autoimmune disease, in most cases, we have the potential, we have the ability of decreasing the likelihood that it will express. Because why? Epigenetics means we have the control over what we put, over how our genes express, in large part. So we have control over what we put into our mouths. We have control over what we put in on our bodies, what we wash our hair with, what we clean our clothes with, what we put in our yards, right? So avoiding the toxic exposures of pesticides, herbicides, the endocrine disruptors in our food and in our body care products and in our laundry care. If you smell your clothes all day long and you smell your sheets all night long, this is a problem. Unless you have really great, strong essential oils, which I've not come across yet. So in most cases, these really big smells, the things that you put in your, like to smell for your house, right? And you plug them in. These plug-ins that you put in are incredibly toxic. So I know that there are some now that are natural. So do your research. Go to ewg.org, environmentalworkinggroup.org, if you want to find out the things that are going to be healthier to make your house smell better. Sometimes we need that. I totally get it. I personally like orange oil. You can get huge bottles of orange oil. They're food grade orange oil to clean your house with and to put in your laundry and to put on your clothes and that kind of thing. So, keep that in mind. There are lots of things that we can do to mitigate these endocrine disruptors that are in our environment. Some of them we can't. We can only control so much, but we can control a lot of this stuff, right? There's so much that we can do. So moving on to, I think we'll move on to ovarian cysts, which can be a problem. They're these fluid-filled sacs that I believe that, let's see, it's the ovarian cysts and fibroids. I believe they have a lot to do with elevated estrogen levels, and I think environmental factors again. As I was just talking about, when we're talking about when we're talking about endocrine disruptors, you hear me say this a lot. But endocrine disruptors, what they do, they're these toxins that mimic estrogens, right? So they're called xenoestrogens. They may be called metalloestrogens. So they mimic estrogen. So they bind really tightly to our estrogen receptor sites on all of our cells in our body, men and women and children, right? And it doesn't allow for our own natural estrogen to do its job. So we have these elevated estrogen levels. And we have our own estrogen levels that are running around going, I don't have a job, I don't know what to do. So we've got, these crazy hormonal symptoms that we can't figure out what they are. And so I believe that those two things, the cysts and the fibroids, have a lot to do with that. They can be painful, they can be damaging to the ovaries, they certainly can interfere with conception and fertility. So, I have often heard and experienced clients who have reversed these conditions on their own through diet, through lifestyle modification, through understanding where hormones are, through understanding where their body is, how it's functioning, based on labs, right? This is how we know this stuff is based on labs. One of the things that I found interesting in here is, one of the sites that I went to, talked about infections. And I thought it was interesting because really all it talked about as far as infections are concerned is gonorrhea and chlamydia and syphilis and these, pretty nasty viruses that can, or infections, right, that can interfere with fertility. But there are lots and lots and lots of infections out there that can interfere with fertility and interfere with life, right? So if we are dealing with a parasitic infection, if we have dysbiosis, so dysbiosis is an imbalance of our good, healthy, natural gut bacteria. Our bodies are little carriers, or big carriers, of millions and millions and millions and trillions of bugs, right? That's really all our bodies do, is they just carry all of these bugs around. And we want them to be friendly bugs, and sometimes they're not. What can happen is if we have an imbalance, imbalances can be due to toxicants, it can be due to antibiotics. Don't take antibiotics unless you have to. There's always a time and a place, not always, there's often a time and a place to take antibiotics. And if you've taken them a lot in your lifetime, probably there's one of my questions on my intake, sorry, I'm skipping around a bit, but one of my questions on my intake is, did you take a lot of antibiotics as a child? More or less than 5 times. And so there's something to that, right? If you took it more than 5 times throughout your childhood, the likelihood that you're dysbiotic is pretty high, right? So you've got bugs in your mouth and in your gut, and in, for women, in our vagina, and all of these things that are really important to maintaining balance. When we don't maintain balance, what can happen is our good, healthy bugs, some of them can become opportunistic. So we call them opportunistic bugs, right? So they can then become pathogenic. Whereas then we also have bacteria and parasites and things that are already pathogenic that just shouldn't be there at all. So we want to do things like a GI panel to understand the health of our gut, because if we do have an unhealthy gut, we may not present as gut pain, right? It can present as brain fog. It can present as cognitively not functioning properly. It can present as knee pain, right? And so just because, even though you don't know you have gut pain, you can still have an unhealthy gut. And so knowing this is key, because if it is unhealthy, that creates stress, or it creates inflammation, which creates more stress, which the body is going to focus on these things and not going to focus on trying to have a kiddo, right? So it's not going to sit there and say, okay, I'm ready to carry kids while I'm still trying to fight this infection. So these infections can create these, this sort of, I see it in my mind's eye as this, little, just sort of this little fire, just this little tiny little ground fire, but that has the potential of creating a lot of damage and a lot of stress on the body. So the beautiful thing about a GI test, nobody likes to do it, right? It's, you got to go poop in a little paper plate, right? It's not fun at all, but it's not difficult, and it can give us so much amazing information. It's really, really fascinating. So we have the ability, when we're looking at a GI panel, we're looking at pancreatic function, we're looking at gallbladder function. Hopefully you still have one. Lots and lots of people don't. But we can still understand, what we might need to do if you don't have a gallbladder any longer. We can look at enzymatic activity. We can look at inflammatory markers. We can look at the potential for leaky gut and the potential for gluten sensitivity. Now, I will say that this particular test, although big and beautiful as it is, it's not a targeted gluten sensitivity test. It's a very general gluten sensitivity test. So I can see if someone has some sensitivity, but even if it comes up and it doesn't show sensitivity, the potential for sensitivity is still there. So I'll just say that there are some really beautiful targeted panels where we can look at, food sensitivities, but specifically gluten. There are, we can be sensitive or reactive to many of the different components of wheat or of barley, right? These gluten, we call gluten. Gluten is it's sort of what we call everything at this point, but there are lots and lots of gliadins and non-gluten proteins and things like this that we have the potential to be sensitive to. We may not actually be sensitive to gluten. We could be sensitive to some of the non-gluten proteins. So it's amazing to be able to have this type of strategic approach to understanding the body, because that's really what it is. It's being strategic and looking as deep as you possibly can to understand why the body's not working the way that we want it to work, right? And why there's stress, and why maybe we're not conceiving, and why maybe our egg quality is not where we want it to be, our sperm quality is not where we want it to be. So much of this has to do with lifestyle. So what else? I think those are the pretty good basics as far as the GI is concerned. But I'll tell you that I run a GI panel on every single client that comes through my door, for real, because it gives me that much information. Another one that I'll run on everyone is going to be, I talked a little bit about this in the beginning, but it's a comprehensive metabolic panel and the CBC. What I tend to see, if somebody brings me their comprehensive metabolic panel or CMP that they did through their GP, their general practitioner, their doctor, oftentimes it's pretty minimal. And especially when we're looking at fertility, but really anytime, we want to look as deep at the inflammatory markers as we can. We want to look at all of the thyroid markers. What I see This goes, this will go into, will just take us into autoimmunity, might as well. We talked a little bit about it already, but Hashimoto's is the #1 autoimmune condition of women. Hashimoto's is an autoimmune thyroid condition. Understand this. Hashimoto's, being an autoimmune condition, is not a thyroid condition. It's an immune condition. It's an immune dysfunction. So what often happens is someone's diagnosed with Hashimoto's, they get put on thyroid meds. That might help for a little while, but it's not addressing the problem. It's not addressing the immune dysfunction. So, even as of yesterday, I was talking with a client who she was testing her thyroid, so her thyroid numbers were tanked. Like, they were really, really low, which means hyper, right? It's overactive. Now, if the numbers are higher, it means it's underactive, right? So what they found in her labs over a period of a few months, as they tested, I think they tested 4 different times, she and her doctor, it went from super low to quite high, which can be indicative of a Hashimoto's flare. But if you don't test antibodies, you don't know if there's Hashimoto's. Now, be very clear that I don't diagnose, right? If something comes up in labs for me that is showing potential for Hashimoto's, I say, this is what, your potential is. I need you to now go see your doctor, right? I'm not a doctor, but I do understand labs pretty well. And so we have to look at the thyroid fully, because the thyroid, even if there's not a situation of Hashimoto's, if there are no antibodies, the thyroid is impacted by the pituitary gland. So we've got the pituitary gland, which impacts the thyroid. The thyroid then impacts the gut, the liver. We have thyroid receptor sites on all cells of our body, everywhere. And so it impacts everything. Our thyroid impacts everything. And so we need to not just look at TSH or just look at T4 or free T4 or free T3, right? We have to look at all of the hormones in the pathway, so we have a full, clear understanding of what is going on with the thyroid, if it's a thyroid issue, if it's a secondary thyroid issue due to primary pituitary, or what else is going on. And so most of our CMPs that are run only look at TSH. They only look at, maybe T4, right, or maybe T3. There are just a couple of these that are run, when really we have to have the entire picture. Let's talk a little bit about when I'm looking at a comprehensive metabolic panel. What I'm looking, so you have it run and you see your lab ranges, right? They're very general lab ranges. And what's interesting too is the lab ranges can vary from lab to lab. Don't ask me why. It's very confusing and very frustrating. And that's not usually a big variation, but it can be a variation. Lab ranges are also built on the general population. They're not built on us being optimized or optimal, right? It's very general, so the ranges are very general. But they're useful, right? They're really useful. They can help us to understand if something is truly pathogenic, if there's truly a problem that's going on. When we're looking, though, at functional ranges of a comprehensive metabolic panel, typically the ranges are a little more narrow. And so what that does is it raises more red flags. And I call them red flags because they're not truly pathogenic necessarily, but they are they're little red flags that come up, and we can start putting pieces of the puzzle together. And that helps us to see more earlier on, and to understand more about the body, how it's functioning earlier than when things are out of lab range and we're like, holy smokes, I gotta, this is now emergent or has become a problem, when we could have addressed it earlier than that. So there are markers in the comprehensive metabolic panel that I run that aren't always run, that I think should always be run. One of those is homocysteine. Homocysteine can play a major role in fertility, and usually when I've seen homocysteine run by our conventional medical world, it's usually done by the cardiologist. Why? Because it's it's a cardiovascular inflammatory marker. It's also a cognitive inflammatory marker. It's also a marker that, if it's elevated, is going to impact fertility. And we don't see homocysteine a lot. And I run it on every person, and I'm going to tell you that I see it elevated, I don't know, 75% of the time, 60% of the time, not really sure, but I see it elevated a lot. And it's a problem. It also, though, is not a difficult marker to bring into into normal range. Usually, homocysteine is elevated due to B12, folate, magnesium. There are a few of these nutrients, and so when we're talking earlier about methylation, homocysteine plays a role, or homocysteine is in the methylation cycle essentially, and so there are nutrients that help to push homocysteine, so it actually will continue to go down the proper pathway instead of staying up here and staying elevated. So most of the time it's pretty easy to address it, but we got to know that it's there, and that if it's a problem or not. And so there are these markers that aren't always checked that should be checked. C-reactive protein, CRP, is another one that we see mostly checked in the cardiovascular world, which is great, but should be checked all the time. It's more of a marker of systemic inflammation. It's systemic cardiovascular inflammation, but it is going to tell us if there is inflammation. And it's inflammation that's the problem when it comes to cardiovascular health, when it comes to diabetes, when it comes to any of the conditions that we deal with. Inflammation is primary, but we have to understand why we're inflamed. Something is causing the inflammation. Remember, always ask why, right? Something deeper is going on. There was something that I was going to say when it comes to autoimmune disease. That's what it was. There is a really cool panel that is an autoimmune panel. It is not a diagnostic panel. I will say again that I don't diagnose, right? And this autoimmune panel is not a diagnostic panel, but it can detect antibody activity. I don't know if I think it's 10 or 12 or 15 years prior to actually an autoimmune condition becoming a problem. So, when we have these autoimmune conditions such as Hashimoto's, such as lupus, if you don't know what an autoimmune condition is, it's where the immune system goes haywire and starts to attack our own tissues. And so obviously this is a problem. But if we are able to detect these conditions, detect the potential earlier, then maybe it doesn't actually ever express, right? So this is a really amazing way to understand the body, understand what your potential is outside of looking at your nutrigenomics or something like that, but can help understand there's antibody activity. We need to address this immediately so it doesn't actually become an autoimmune condition. It is again, I just go back to how amazing and beautiful it is that we have access to these functional labs that dig deep, and to the amazingly smart scientists out there who put these labs together that we don't typically see in mainstream. I don't know why, because it would sure be helpful, but mainstream often is there to address symptoms when we're here to address root cause. Sorry, excuse me. Other things that we can look at that can play a key role in health period, but in fertility, in preconception care, preconception planning, is looking at the toxic load that you might be dealing with. We all deal with some kind of toxic load. Some of us, due to epigenetic variants, don't deal as well as others. So if we're looking at something like, say, mycotoxin exposure. So we can have mycotoxin exposure, so it's mold, right? We can have mycotoxin exposure through food, grains, fruits, vegetables, grains, you think about grains sitting in these silos forever. I mean, it's a huge problem, but they tend to be really high in mycotoxins. Fruits like apples that are stored for, however long, it can be an apple juice that's, made from moldy apples. So we can have this exposure, and some of us have these variants that don't allow us to detoxify this exposure very well, and so it creates more of a burden, and we don't deal with it well. So, I have a number of people who are in my world, whether they're practitioners or clients, who are dealing with mycotoxin exposure, and it has the potential of taking such a long time to eliminate it, because it's not something that just goes away. It will sit and just kind of festers, what comes to me. It's not really the best word, but it will proliferate. And so mycotoxin exposure is a problem, even in dry climates. I'm in Colorado. We have a pretty dry climate here, and we have lots of people who are dealing with mycotoxin exposures and mycotoxin toxicity. So, so being aware of that, you can test your home, you can test think about where you work if you're working outside of the home. That can happen a lot in these old buildings, right? But we can also look at environmental factors. So we have glyphosate, which most of us probably have heard of at this point. If you don't know glyphosate, then you certainly know Roundup. And these pesticides and herbicides, glyphosate is an herbicide, but we have both the pesticides and the herbicides that are on our food, that are in our environment, that can sit in the body, and we may not be able to detoxify it properly. Interestingly, I was at a conference. No, it was not a conference. It was more of a weekend seminar, I guess. But it was all on epigenetics, which is a lot of it's way over my head. It's amazing stuff. But somebody made the point. So this is not backed by science. It's not backed by evidence, right? But it was an interesting point that I like to point out, because I think it can. I like to pay attention to this in practice when I'm working with people, as well as when I'm listening to people when they talk. But there are epigenetic variants that don't allow us to detoxify pesticides and herbicides well. And so they tend to build up more, and so they create more of a problem for more people, or for some people, right? Some people don't deal with it as well as others. Interestingly, though, when we're looking at things like nightshades, so nightshades are vegetables that they naturally have a protective pesticide in them, and can be considered anti-nutrients. They're considered, can be considered toxic. Some people react to them, some people don't. If you have an autoimmune condition, you probably should not eat nightshades. But they're peppers and tomatoes and potatoes, eggplants. Those are sort of your basic nightshades. So, but that's a lot of food, right? This pesticide, this natural pesticide that's in these vegetables, could be, if some people don't deal with them very well, and a lot of people don't, autoimmune disease or otherwise, it could be because of these genetic variants that don't allow for the proper detoxification of pesticides and herbicides. How cool is that? So don't know that's fact, but it's an interesting point that was brought up at this seminar that I was in. So pretty cool stuff. Anyway, so beyond that, there are also heavy metals. So a lot of the toxicants that we deal with also are heavy metals. When I was talking earlier about metalloestrogens, I'm talking about heavy metals that can play a role in endocrine disruption, in looking like estrogens and being estrogen mimickers, right? And so, these heavy metals can create a problem. So I was talking to someone yesterday about mercury. And so there are some people with these epigenetic variants that don't allow for the proper detoxification of mercury, which can play a role in Alzheimer's disease. And so, we have, there are lots and lots of toxic metals out there, but that's just one of them. There's mercury, and there's, I don't even know. cadmium, you name it. There's some pretty nasty ones out there, and they're in a lot of the toxins that are in our environment that are put in our, fire retardants that are put on our furniture, right, and in our beds and in our kids' clothes, in cribs. I mean, these are it breaks my heart. These things, these fire retardants. I understand the reason why they were put in stuff in the first place, but it's like you're covering up a problem, with things catching on fire. Great, with a consistent or constant toxic exposure of these fire retardants. Think about the stuff that's on our toys for kids, our toys for our dogs, right? That they put in their mouth all the time. If you have dogs, don't just go get any stuffed animal. I always look for the ones that are made of natural fibers, that are not made in China, because this is another toxic exposure for our dogs, for our pets, stuffed animals, clothes, rugs. I mean, again, it goes back to how it's so difficult to avoid everything, but having the awareness as you move forward can help to help you make the choices that are best for you and your family, as from today on, right? This is why I do this show, so we can be educated and have the ability to dig deeper. I don't ever expect you just to listen to me, but I do expect that if I say something that either you need to dig into deeper, or that even you question, which is great, question me, dig deeper into it. Be educated. You're accountable for your health, and take that, so then you can make the decisions based on the knowledge that you have. We're not all perfect. We're not all going to make the best decisions, right? I say that a lot when it comes to our food, and our our diets. I don't always make the perfect decision with what I put into my mouth, but I'm educated enough to know when I'm not making the right decision and what's going to happen if I don't make the right decision. And that's okay. That's the power that I have, and that's the accountability that I have on myself. And that's how we all should be. So knowledge is power. Knowledge is amazing. Knowledge is beautiful. Knowledge can be hard, but the more knowledge we have, the better decisions that we can make. So I'm over my time. This was really fun for me because I could just keep talking about this stuff forever and ever, and I enjoy the heck out of it. But we'll talk more about this. I think digging into labs and what they can do for us are it's really fascinating. It is for me, and maybe not so much for you, but knowing that they're out there is really what's important for me. You don't have to know all the details. That's what I like, right? But knowing that you have the options of digging deeper into what's going on with your health is it's the key to bringing health back if you feel like it's not where it should be, right? So with that said, of course, find me at tastelifenutrition.com. You can fill out a free assessment online. Actually, I'm saying that and it's gone. So it'll be back. I have to do that today. Something happened to it. And so that free assessment is not there. So it's really frustrating. I'm not sure what happened. But it will be there. If you don't see it today, then you'll find it soon, because I'm going to have it put back. My website company needs to get it back on there. Anyway, I just discovered that yesterday. So, but usually I have a free assessment where I reach out to you personally and we chat about whatever's going on with you and see if I might be able to help, or if I know somebody who might be able to help. That's the great thing about what I do, is I have a lot of really cool people who do really cool stuff who might be able to help you more than I can. Also, would love for you to share Soulful Conception, or talk to me about it, learn about it, understand what it is, what it's about. It really is about creating a healthy pregnancy, a healthy baby, a healthy body, and a healthy future. We have so much control over the future of health, and I think it's imperative that we understand the amount of power that we have. It's really beautiful. And then, of course, we're always streaming live here at KUHSdenver.com. You'll find us here. Then you'll find us as the Taste Life Nutrition Podcast, wherever you find your favorite podcast, and, of course, on YouTube. and working on getting everything on Rumble as well, digging Rumble. So thank you. See you next week. We will have a guest next week. I should probably know who it is, but I don't. So we'll see you next week with one of the amazing guests who is going to join us, and we'll see you. I hope you all have an amazing day and an amazing weekend. See you later.
If it's touchscreen, just touch the top and stop video.
This one? This one?
Down.
Stop.
Stop video. Right hand side.
Right hand side. Stop recording.
Yes. No, that open. That one.
Streaming and recording.
Yes.